Tim McManus, ESPN.com, NFL Nation, with us as the Eagles have the off day today. But, Tim, they begin preparing for Dallas tomorrow. And you would have to think that right back to the right guard position is going to be a big focus this week. Vaitai back on the road now in a primetime situation. This might be even a more tougher task for him than the Washington game.
Well, it's definitely going to be an area of focus, and if you look at the dip of Carson Wentz's play, it coincides with the absence of Lane Johnson, right? Over the last 2 games, his completion rate is 54%. He has 1 touchdown and 3 turnovers, and that is with Big V at right tackle. And, in the Washington game, he obviously struggled against Ryan Kerrigan. He was better this week against Minnesota, but that doesn't really change the fact that Wentz did not look like he was in a comfort zone. And I think that we can probably point to the fact that he's missing his best offensive lineman as one of the reasons for that. So I agree with you. Just because it was a better outing out of Vaitai last week does not mean that the issue overall is resolved.
Yeah, you wrote about that, Wentz is kind of fighting through this first little rookie bumps in the road here. And, is that more him? Is that more the surrounding pieces or the lack thereof?
I think that there's many factors that come in. So wide receivers, as we know, have not been all that great for him so far this season. His drop rate is at 5.4%, according to ESPN stats and information, and that puts him in the top 5 worst drop rates in the NFL. So they're not holding onto the ball. They're not gaining enough separation consistently enough. And then we know that the offensive line, I think, is at least in the back of his mind, and there's some mechanical issues that are starting to creep in as well. And then the other part is that there's tape on Wentz now. And so defensive coordinators have more of a bead on what Doug Peterson and Wentz are trying to do. And they're trying to take away his first and second reads, and in some cases successfully so. And these are the type of things that the rookie's going to go through. I don't really sense that there's panic in the building over it. I mean, everybody still is very high on the long-term prospects of Wentz, but he's in a funk right now. I don't think you can really dispute that.
Yeah, Tim, there was some impressive stuff, though, as well. I mean, obviously, Minnesota has a very good defense. They shut down Aaron Rodgers, Cam Newton, Eli Manning, guys with a ton of experience. So it made a little sense that he would struggle. But when he did make mistakes, the thing that impressed me versus Sam Bradford, for instance, who's a 7-year veteran, is he forgot about it. He sort of had that cornerback mentality, and the fact that you put it in the rearview mirror and you move forward. Is that something you've seen and that Carson can build on?
Yeah, I would say that he isn't one to get quickly rattled, and he does, in his words, has a real short-term memory when it comes to that kind of stuff, good or bad, and I think that serves a quarterback really well, Johnny Mack. At the same time, I've been a little bit surprised about the positive spin that has been put on that performance. I mean, if you look at how other quarterbacks have performed over time in Eagles history, if they have 3 turnovers, they're not getting the benefit of the doubt of, but he looked pretty good in the second half, So that part, I think, really speaks to the fact that I think the fan base has collectively rallied around Wentz, and that's exactly what he needs, actually, from the city. I think he has the full support of this fan base, and that's going to be critical because there are going to be ups and downs. But I do agree with your general point that he's someone that just because it doesn't work on this play means that that's going to affect him, or if he has a bad quarter, it's going to affect him for the rest of the half or the rest of the game. He's someone that seems to be able to lock back in.
Tim, I want to talk about the unsung hero of this team, and I don't know about you, but I don't think enough people know about what Dave Fipp has done for the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a team that, since he's gotten here, has consistently dominated on special teams. They're facing a team that was the only other one besides Philadelphia that scores a significant amount on those units. And all of a sudden, that turns the game for the Eagles, the Josh Huff kickoff return. And Philadelphia's the only team in the NFL to return a kickoff for a touchdown, and they have 2 of them. Talk about what Dave Fipp does for this organization.
Well, just think about that 2014 season where Chip's offense started going off, and not as productive as it was in that first year, and yet they were saved in a lot of games because of the special teams play. A lot of people kind of chalk that up to Chip Kelly's emphasis on special teams because he's known, and in fact, during practices would spend an inordinate amount of time on focused on special teams, and people thought that was just kind of the Chip philosophy. But little did they know that, Fipp had a huge hand in that. And we've seen evidence of that, given that Kelly is gone, Fipp is still here, and the special teams continue to produce. And I don't think you can mistake it. I mean, it's Wendell Smallwood one week and Josh Huff the next, and they do it in just all of their respective phases. I mean, it's been so critical. It gets overlooked, of course, even when they are spectacular. That aspect of the game always gets overlooked. It's about the quarterback and the offense and the defense, but it's rarely a focus on special teams. But the Eagles, over the last 3+ seasons, have had it as good as anybody, and that's because of Fipp largely.
Tim McManus with us, talking Eagles football. And Tim, John, and Mike Gill and I talk a little bit about the rumors about Torrey Smith today. Would getting a guy like Torrey Smith help Wentz out, having that deep threat that they're lacking right now? Or does his name make sense that those rumors are out there that we're hearing?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and I think that it would help Wentz out. We know that in the offseason, Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman were looking for wide receivers that would be able to stretch the field, and they brought in Chris Givens for that potential role, and Ruben Randall was here. Neither of those guys made the team, and there's really nobody on the roster that can do that with any sort of consistency. Torrey Smith can. I mean, he's at least coming out of Maryland, had a sub 4.40. He averages over 17 yards per catch. I mean, that's what he does. There's the thing. I would imagine if there is a holdup, it would be all right, well, what's the compensation? Because sure, it would be nice to bring somebody like that in, but the Eagles also have an eye towards the future and want to make sure that they're not compromising that for a deep threat that will be a difference maker, but not a stud number one necessarily. So it makes sense to me. I would not be surprised at all if there were conversations, and then it just becomes a matter as we creep closer to the November 1 deadline, whether the compensation makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, and John's reservation with the deal, he likes Alshon Jeffrey, and he said that the issue would be maybe with his contract.
Yeah, the contract is. You could argue prohibitive for Jeffrey. For Torrey Smith, it's a little bit more manageable. He's due to make $6.5 next year, and then for the 2 years following that. But my understanding is that that he has the money doesn't guarantee for next year until April 1st, so there would be some time to potentially maneuver out of that. And of course, there's always the option of restructuring, et cetera. And so it's not like it's an ideal contract, but it's one that's more manageable, certainly, than the one that Jeffrey will present.
Talking with Tim McManus, ESPN.com's NFL Nation here. Eagles Cowboys this week. And Tim, I guess the injuries, the Eagles have not been nailed with injuries too much this year, but as we get to the middle of the season, they're starting to creep in. Ron Brooks, maybe under the radar, but what is their recourse here? What do they do in that secondary? I mean, he's a valuable guy in that, he plays a role that's kind of unheralded a lot. So do they move pieces around? Do they start looking on the street? What do you think is their plan of action to replace him?
Well, we know that Howie Roseman's not afraid to trade. Yeah. Since 2010, this club has traded away 35 players, which is more than twice the amount of the second closest team. So he's obviously not afraid to wheel and deal, and I'm sure that they'll be looking out on the market to see if they can make anything happen at the cornerback position. But what team in the right mind would give up a really good cornerback is one problem that they might encounter, and so they might have to make do with what they have. And the plan right now, it sounds like, is to have Malcolm Jenkins slide into that slot position when they go into nickel, and have Jalen Watkins move out to safety. And Jenkins thrived in that role for the most part last year. I think the one exception might be against Dallas, actually, in November when he suffered the concussion, and Cole had a really nice game against them. But other than that, Jenkins was really good in that spot. I mean, cornerback and the secondary overall is not a great strength of this team. And the more hits they take, the more that the thinner it'll get. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But so they can't really afford much more in that realm. But as far as the way that it's currently constituted, they're getting a little bit of productivity out of Jalen Mills, which has been a bonus, and they know that Jenkins is pretty capable when he needs to play that slot position.
Hey, Tim, if we could rewind, would Eric Rowe help this team right now? I thought that was a trade at the time that maybe the Eagles gave up on a young player who was struggling in a new system, maybe it would have been more prudent to give him at least a little more time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought that one was a little bit curious, John. And if you go back to when Corey Undlin first got here and he was talking about Eric Rowe and people were saying, are you going to think about him at safety? What's the deal there? And he says, no, we think that he can be a high-end cornerback, and said it with conviction. And when he was approached about the same line of questioning midseason, he maintained that. And Rowe, I thought, showed some flashes. I mean, it wasn't all perfect, obviously, his rookie year, but he showed a couple nice moments. And he obviously just didn't mesh very well with Schwartz and what Schwartz wanted to do on defense, and just became, well, let's just get rid of him. But I agree with you. I think that he was somebody worth holding on to, and it sounds like he's done a pretty decent job in his opportunities in New England, and that might be one when they look back on it that they regret.
Tim McManus with us. The Eagles beat the Vikings, and then after the game, Tim, over at ESPN.com, NFL Nation, you wrote a piece about Malcolm Jenkins saying, we think we're the number one defense in this league. And I wonder, after what you saw from 2 weeks and then what you saw this past week, do you give a lot of credit to Jim Schwartz, or is this just a inept Minnesota offensive front, with not a lot of weapons that attributed to this, or was there something that Philadelphia changed that kind of clicked and that put them back on the defensive map?
I think that we can account for both things. So, number one, we know that the offensive line for Minnesota is decimated, and we're having our share of issues. But the other part of that is that Schwartz presented a game plan that caught Bradford by surprise. And this was a team that entered that game with the lowest blitz percentage in the NFL, and at 17%, and he dialed it up to over 25% in that game. And not only were they blitzes, but they were blitzes specific to Bradford's vulnerabilities, which they picked up on during training camp. Schwartz knew that certain zone blitzes would not react well to them, and he was right. And so I think that you do have to credit the defensive coordinator who last week said, it's on me to stop the bleeding when the game plan doesn't work, and have to find a nice changeup if there are any, and he did. I mean, he found a way to get these guys loose, and I thought it showed a good amount about this defense, that they were able to bounce back and take the challenge of going up against the number one defense opposite them and one-up them. But that's really going to be the key for me moving forward, is that consistency, because we've seen it. Over the first 3 games, they allowed only 20 points total in those 3 games, and then there was a lapse. And then they come back against Minnesota, and they look awesome. But they're going to have to stay steady as they move forward, because I don't really see the offense staying steady. What we know about the offensive line, the wide receivers, Carson Wentz is going to be up and down, you would imagine. And so if they're going to need that steadying force, and it's got to be the defense. And so they feel like they're the number one defense. They're going to have to start acting like that consistently if they want to get to where they want to go.
Tim McManus, ESPN.com's NFL Nation. As the Eagles beat the Vikings, they head on to Dallas now for Sunday Night Football. Should be very entertaining. We'll learn a lot more as we do every single week. Tim, we appreciate the time, pal.
All right, guys. Good